This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Welcome to the Japan on Film podcast. I'm your host, Perry Constantine, and welcoming back a returning guest, and that is Sam Inglis. Sam, how you doing today?
Hi, Perry. Yeah, I'm good, thank you. It's a little early here, but what are you going to do?
One of the downsides of me being in Japan and you and a lot of the people part of the Film Stories Network being in the UK is that we do have to record at odd hours for you guys. So I definitely appreciate you waking up early for that.
Yeah, no worries.
But today we are. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, how's things?
Well, things are going okay. My kids gave me hand, foot, and mouth disease for Father's Day, which I finally recovered from. One of the things nobody tells you about when your kids start preschool is that they're going to bring home all sorts of mutant diseases that you've never heard of before.
My stepdad got COVID for Father's Day, so
Yeah, that's actually going around my kids' preschool right now too. So who knows how long I'll last before I get sick again. But today we're talking about a really interesting movie. This is a movie that I'd heard about in different areas, but I'd never actually seen for myself until watching it for today. And this is 1985's Typhoon Club, directed by Shinji Somai. And we were talking a little bit off mic, and I kind of got the impression that you're a bit of a fan of this director. So why don't we start off with what your history is
no.
with... Oh, I'm sorry.
This is the first Somai that I've seen.
Oh, okay.
But I'm just interested. I was saying off mic that I've ordered another of his films that's also from a director's company who we'll talk about in a bit, who did this film and quite a few others. But it just hasn't arrived yet. And I was hoping to watch that as sort of further background on Samai to get more of a handle on whether this is typical of his style or whatever. But yeah, this is actually the first of his films that I've seen.
Okay, so again, that makes me kind of the expert here because I have seen one other of his movies. I've seen Sailor Suit and Machine Gun, which we did an episode on a few years back.
I tell a lie. I have seen Sailor Suit and Machine Gun.
Is it the original one, or is it the one from 1980s, or is it the more recent one?
Yeah, the 80s one.
Okay,
I forgot about that. Yes, I forgot that was Samai. And there was a weird thing with that when I was watching, as we talked about on our last episode together, a lot of Sakura Ando films at the beginning of this year. One of the things I watched was this TV movie where she plays a nurse for like 10 minutes. And I was watching the older lead in that. I was like, I recognize her. Why can't I place her? And I looked it up. She's the lead in Sailor Suit and Machine Gun. Still, working away and long career, which is great. But yeah, so I got reminded of that film that way.
Yes. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm good.
Okay, so yeah, I was just gonna say that that's obviously where I remembered Somai from as well. So I would say it is kind of I guess this is kind of typical of his style then, because, well, for one, I think it's not what you might expect based on the premise and based on the title. I've seen a lot of comparisons made between this and The Breakfast Club, which came out about I think a year before, or just like a few months before, or something like that. Very
Same
close to
year,
release
yeah.
date. Same year, yeah. So it was a few months before. And going to Sailor Suit and Machine Gun, I think that's a pretty interesting place to kind of start, at least as far as my background goes, because that's a movie that you hear that title, you look at the cover, and you're thinking, oh, this is going to be pure exploitation, not unlike, lots of the low budget um Japanese horror exploitation movies they have out there, like The Machine Girl, like, you know, Vampire Girl versus Frankenstein Girl, like Bloody Chainsaw Girl and all that. So you see Sailor Suit and Machine Gun, you think that's going to be the kind of the same thing, but it really wasn't. I was really kind of surprised when I saw it, and how different it was from what I expected. And Typhoon Club too also had that kind of same feel to it, because I went into it expecting it's going to be kind of like a Breakfast Club type of situation, and it's not that at all. But let's talk about your history with this movie then.
Well, my history with this movie comes first out of the fact that I've been trying to catch up on Japanese cinema recently. I've always watched a bunch of cinema from around the world, but I've been, just sort of I'm at over 50 Japanese films this year now. But actually, my major initial interest in this comes out of my interest in coming of age cinema. Um, in general, from all over the world, and yeah, which is interesting because as somebody who like has a major critical interest in coming of age cinema, I really don't like The Breakfast Club, or indeed John Hughes, kind of as a rule. Um, I think The Breakfast Club is kind of a fake movie in a lot of ways, in that it sort of pitches itself as saying something that it's not saying. It's a much more conservative film than it actually pitches itself as. And the rebellion that they go through actually ends up making them more conformist, which is, kind of a shit message for me. Um, so but I've just always been interested in coming of age cinema, and because there's a sort of universality to it, in terms of like the general beats of coming of age movies are something that we all go through wherever we're from, whoever we are, pretty much. Like there are differences, of course, whether you're, you know there are obviously some racial differences, some differences depending on your sexuality and things like that. But the core of it is kind of universal. And I think that's interesting in terms of Typhoon Club, because I feel like we see a lot of things that are very universal here, and a lot of things that seem very specifically Japanese in the filmmaking.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that's a really interesting point. The fact you mentioned about The Breakfast Club, I do enjoy that movie, but I think you definitely make a good argument there, especially the ending. It does feel kind of um like they're reverting back to, the kind of expectations that are placed on them. So we have the nerdy guy is the one who has to do everybody's homework at the end, and then we have the Ali Sheedy character, who she has to be, all prettied up, and she has to look like one of the popular girls now. So
I
I
hate
do
what
agree
they
with
do
you.
to Ali Sheedy in that
Yeah,
movie so
it's
much.
ridiculous. It is ridiculous. And also, one of the things I remembered from that, which we'll get into here, is the kind of like normalizing of sexual assault, right? The What Judd Nelson's character does to Molly Ringwald's character, and how he's like, perving on her and all that.
Yeah.
And then at the end, he gets, quote unquote rewarded by becoming her boyfriend. And there is something similar in this, where we do have this sexual assault that Ken perpetrates on one of the girls. I'm blanking on her name right now, but it's when when it happens in The Breakfast Club, it's played for laughs right from beginning to end of the entire thing. But here, it's played like a horror movie. And then
Yeah.
when it just gets kind of dropped, I think there's a bigger message that Somai is trying to convey with that, which is something I do want to get into. So I did feel
Yeah.
like that was interesting, a big difference from The Breakfast Club and this.
Uh, Before we get into the film, though, I think we should maybe talk a little about the director's company.
Okay, sure.
Uh, which is the production company that made this film, and which was active for almost exactly a decade, from June 1982 to May 1992. And it was a company made up of a group of 8 independent directors, who got together to form this production company to make kind of more like the films that they wanted to make. A lot of them, or several of them, including Shinji Samai, had come from working on Roman porno films at Nikatsu. Samai, I saw on his filmography, was AD on several before he started. Others had worked in Pinku Eiger, which, to my understanding, is more like the independent sector of those kind of softcore films, and some of them, including Kiyoshi Kurosawa, had been doing like underground 8mm stuff before this, and they all kind of got together to make their own films and try and produce and distribute them independently. It kind of makes me think of like United Artists in the early days of Hollywood, which was, I think, Mary Pickford, Charlie Chaplin, and Douglas Fairbanks initially getting together to form a company. And UA, eventually obviously got like folded into MGM. Directors Company just folded, sadly. They made a variety of films, from Pinku to horror to dramas like Typhoon Club. 28 of them over the decade that they were active, but an over budget period piece called Travels in the Orient sent them into bankruptcy in 92. So I mean, that's as much as I've been able to glean as like a very basic overview. I need to do some more research into them. Third Window are putting out a bunch of their films, and I've got Luminous Woman on the way, and I want to get more of them. But yeah, that's a very, very basic overview. And if people know more, or if I've missed a few things, please excuse me. I've only just sort of started diving into their stuff.
No, that's very helpful background information. I wasn't aware of any of that stuff. The Pinku Ego stuff, the Ega stuff is really interesting, because the Pink films, yeah, you're right. It was kind of like this, independent version of like the Roman porno films. And it was where a lot of these directors got their start, because basically the whole idea was they're just making stuff for, at first, for like the low run porno theaters, and then later for the VHS market and the rental market, really. And it was really just kind of like this thing where they'd go up to a director and they'd say, here's your budget. It has to have this number of sex scenes or nudity scenes or whatever it might be. And I'm not sure if they would give like genre suggestions or requirements or not, but they might have said like it has to be like it has to be like a cop movie, or it has to be a prison movie or something like that. And then other than that, they just be like, okay, go to work, and then let's see your product in like 6 weeks or whatever it was for the filming schedule. So a lot of these directors, they had a lot of they had a lot of freedom to just kind of like do what they wanted to, as long as they had as long as they met those very kind of broad requirements, just 3 sex scenes, and then just fit the runtime and turn it in on time and under budget, and we'll put it out. So that led to a lot of creativity, and yeah, a lot of great directors did get their start, like Somai, and like you said, Kiyoshi Kurosawa as well. So it's a really interesting market, and I've only delved into some of the Pink films. I haven't done like a full dive into it, but it is something I'm interested in exploring a little bit more in depth at some point.
Yeah, I haven't seen a lot. Most of what I have seen is notable, I think, for its short running time. A lot of them are like around an hour, um, which I think is interesting, because there's not really a market. I think that's why we don't see them coming out a lot. That it's hard to market a film that's only like 64 minutes long or something. It kind of feels like you're not getting much, excuse the expression, given that we're talking about softcore, bang for your buck. So, particularly when physical media releases of stuff like this can be very, very expensive. I got Luminous Woman on sale and it was still a full 20 quid. you know
Well,
um
also, oh, sorry, keep going.
no, that's cool.
Well, I was just going to say that it's also, the whole market has shifted. Back then, if you didn't want to put out that something that was just obviously pornography, because then it would just get labeled to the porn section. But if you had like the veneer of a storytelling, you had some sex scenes in it, then you could get a bit of a wider market penetration, for lack of a better word there. But that's not really something that happens anymore, now that market's pretty much dead now. I mean, we still have some rental stores here in Japan, but they are dying out. In America, they've been dead for years, and everything's on streaming, and the kind of like appetite for the soft core stuff, I don't really think it doesn't really seem to be there anymore, because you don't have to go to a movie theater and act like there's a veneer of, oh, well, I'm just going to see a movie. It just happens to have some sex scenes in it. Whereas now you can watch, porn streaming for free in the privacy of your own home, so you don't have to worry about it. So I think
Yeah.
I think all that is really kind of like killed off that market.
Yeah, and the erotic thriller in a lot of ways, yeah, because why pretend anymore? I guess is the thing. But what you were saying about the way it was sort of set up, what it really reminds me of is kind of, and he recently passed, the Corman philosophy, which raised. I mean, I've alleged before, and I stand by it, that Roger Corman, at least in American cinema, is the most important figure of the last 60 years, because of all the filmmakers that he gave a break to, and had that same approach. Like, here's the money, we want some nudity and or some violence every 10 minutes, make something, you know and or make a biker movie, or whatever was popular at the time. And so many people, the entire movie brats generation, except really Spielberg, cut their teeth under him. Incredible. And it
I
seems
think the
like this is
Corman
kind of the same thing.
Exactly. Yes, I think the Corman comparison is a very good one. Um, All right, so let's dive into Typhoon Club.
Mm.
Um, like I said, this was my first time seeing it, and it definitely impressed me, and in what it was doing. There's still some things that I'm not quite sure why they did that. There's some weird aspects of this that I don't quite understand what Somai was going for. Like, for example, this weird kind of subplot with the teacher Umemiya and his girlfriend and her mother's brother, who also seems to be a Yakuza guy. So all of that was kind of like, that was a really bizarre interlude, because that jumps out like right at the beginning. It's like it's one of the first big things that happens after the well, we'll talk basically the water torture scene at the beginning that opens the film. But it's like the first like really big event that happens in this movie. And I couldn't really figure out what was the point of all the screen time that we spent on that. What was kind of your thought about that?
I mean, actually, it doesn't take up that much time. I think kind of what he's going for is that the reason that exists is for the last telephone conversation that happens when the kids are calling him from the school when they're locked in the school during the typhoon, and we'll get there. But there's this conversation about being an adult. Um, and I'm just looking for my notes on this. Sorry, you'll have to cut this. Uh, yeah, there's this conversation that he has with a couple of the kids, and the one who's kind of a bookworm through most of the film is the main person he talks to, and the kids are trying to get him to take some degree of responsibility and come and help them and find them and get them out of the school. But he's drunk, and he says to this kid, in 15 years you're going to be what I am now. And I think what we see in him in the rest of the film suggests that there's something of a drunken truth to that. That there was probably an Umemiya who was kind of rebellious and fun and is now just buried under being a teacher and having this conventional life. And also I think it's also implied that the debt that he owes to this family, the family of his girlfriend, isn't actually his debt. It's something that she's lied to them about, that her ex-boyfriend was involved in, and he's kind of taken on. There's a conversation early in the film between them that suggests that. So I think he's just very frustrated at his station in life. And I feel like this is almost an anti-coming of age film. These kids don't want to grow up, and Umemiya is a reflection of why.
I think you're definitely right on the idea of it being an anti-coming of age film. And yeah, I got most of that from it. So I understand what Somai was trying to do with these scenes of Umemiya and the weight of the responsibility and the whole, you'll be like me in 15 years. Right. The whole idea of, which it's the same thing I've heard all my life about how, oh, you'll be more conservative when you get older, is what I heard a lot growing up. And then I've gotten I've went the opposite direction. But
yeah, same.
Yeah. And but the thing the debt thing is interesting. That was the thing that was really kind of a question mark for me, because I couldn't really parse that conversation. That conversation felt a little muddled to me with his girlfriend in the beginning, so I had trouble kind of following what was happening there. And then the whole thing with him having because it's this kind of like this surprising moment that Somai focuses, not like focuses in, but he makes sure you don't miss it when the uncle takes off his top and shows his Yakuza tattoos. So it was just a very odd thing to drop in there in the middle of the movie, and I couldn't quite figure out what the intent was. I get the other part about the messages trying to send about him, crumbling under responsibility and him just being forced to be an adult now. But yeah, the Yakuza aspect of it was really just kind of puzzling for me.
That is sort of thrown in, and I wonder to a certain degree if he's meant to be like a former Yakuza, because his tattoos are not very complete. Or low ranked. They're just over the shoulders rather
I noticed
than,
that too.
yeah. So I don't know quite what that's implying, but again, I think that and the whole issue of the debt is one of these areas in which, and maybe you're better placed to comment on this, this film feels sort of peculiarly Japanese.
I know there are a lot of problems with debt, and do know that there is a lot of the Yakuza are involved in a lot of loan sharking and that kind of stuff. So I guess maybe it was to drive home the seriousness of the debt, but then again, he doesn't seem uncomfortable being around the guy either. So just a lot of things just don't really kind of quite fit so well in that. Um, Now, something else is at the beginning of the movie when we see them at the pool, and it seems like this, kind of like this, kind of like just, oh, just young, having fun. And then they have this situation with this kid Akira who is almost drowned. And, it's kind of played for a while. And then you find out the reason why. And that's kind of like the start of like this sinister underbelly throughout this entire movie. So it starts off with this typical like teen rom-com situation where you've got one of the kids peeking out on the girls when they're they're having fun in the pool, and then he ends up getting in trouble for it, and then he gets revived and everything's okay. But then you find out the reason why he ended up getting in trouble is because the girls caught him spying on him and then basically water tortured him.
Yeah, I think the thing that's really interesting about that for me is like aside from they're going a bit far, obviously, and I think it's clear to me that um that Akira nearly drowning is an accident, that they're just sort of it's horseplay and they've gone too far. Um, but I think the thing that's interesting to me about that is it's the first of several moments in the film where Somai goes into a flashback without telling you in any way, shape, or form that he's going into a flashback. So sometimes the chronology of the film is a little confusing. I'm glad that this was the second time that I'd seen it for this show, because yeah, on the first time I think I maybe missed some of those chronological things.
Yes, I definitely missed a lot of those chronological things, and there are several moments when I wasn't sure if we were in a flashback or if we were still in the main timeline. So he does a lot of quick cutting like that, in that where he doesn't give you a lot of warning about what's happening. One of the things too that's interesting about the actors in the film too is usually you get a movie like this, and there are a few older ones here. So for example, Shingo Tsurumi, who he played I'm not sure who he played. Maybe Ken, because his name's not listed here. Um but he was like the oldest one. He was about 21 when this movie came out. But and then you have Yuka Onishi. She was about 17, and
Mm,
so was Yuriko Fujizaki. And but Yuki Kudo was like 14 years old when this was made, which
yeah.
I think might be why another reason why that character was not involved in the naked dancing scene. Although Yuka Onishi said that she actually wore skin-colored underwear when they were dancing in that scene. But it did feel interesting that when I was watching this movie, I did get a sense that these actors did really feel like they were junior high school students. I mean, you compare it to, say, Battle Royale, which, it's a movie I love, but I cannot believe that those kids are junior high school students.
Well, I think oh God, I've forgotten her name. The girl who was in Kill Bill, who is also in
Chiaki
uh,
Kuriyama.
yes, I think Chiaki Kuriyama was quite young at the time of Battle Royale. She started her career quite young as well. But I think what you're saying about here, it is a thing in high school movies that everyone's a lot older than they're playing. There are exceptions, like Molly Ringwald in Breakfast Club is pretty young as well. But I think one of the things that really helps sell it, and I think you can tell that Ken, the actor playing Ken, is a bit older, and I think that works for the film in a certain way, because he's kind of the bigger guy, the more threatening one. Um, but I think what helps sell it is that Yuki Kudo is so young, and that sort of almost works as a shorthand for the rest. If because kids at that age can look like they're 12 or look like they're 16, 17. You get that sort of spectrum across a class. And I think, having that spectrum in the cast actually sells it really well, that they're all, these junior high school kids. And just to start talking about the cast, I think Kudo is just terrific here. Um, I really like her storyline. There's just such an essential sweetness that comes off her, as early as the initial moments when she's walking to school with her boyfriend Mikami, who's kind of the bookworm of the class, played by uh, Yuichi Mikami, in fact. And yeah, I enjoy their sort of relationship throughout the film, and her performance I think is really, really strong. There's a lot of really strong performances here that we'll get to, though.
Yes, the another thing too, I think that helps it is even though we do have these scenes of sexuality, there's not a sexualization, right? Like again, compared to Battle Royale, right? The uniforms those girls are wearing much more fit into like the kind of like exploitation type of thing where it's these really kind of short skirts that like end at like mid just above mid thigh and all that. But the girls are all wearing like a lot of makeup and that kind of stuff. But in this movie, and I know this because I taught in junior high schools for several years. The skirts they do wear, they are like below the knee length skirts. So it does help to kind of like drive home the more realistic aspect of it. And even when we do see these kinds of more sexual scenes, like with the lesbian girls, or like with when they're dancing naked in the rain or they're dancing in their underwear, it's not filmed in a very voyeuristic way. It's not filmed in an exploitative way. Like the naked dancing scene, it's completely filmed from afar.
Mm.
And unless you're looking closely, and there's so much rain falling too that it's hard to even see them at some points too. So unless you know that they're naked in that scene, it is kind of, or unless you're very closely paying attention, it's very easy to not realize what's happening there.
Yeah, I think a lot of that comes out of the camera style that Samai uses throughout the film. There are a lot of scenes here that unfold with a still or slow moving camera, or indeed in a single locked off shot. You were talking about the scene where the girls, sorry, Yasuko, Midori, and Michiko um, are all hanging out, and there's a sort of uh, playful sequence where two of them, I forget who in this moment, start kissing, and that is played entirely in a locked off shot. So, Samai isn't, literally leaning in with his camera to observe that. And the same for when they start dancing initially on the stage and taking their clothes off, and then in the rain. You know, it's more about the experience of that moment for the characters than for you, and that's where he's watching it from a distance, and not allowing you into their moment, just having you observe it.
Yes, I think the camera work is definitely helps with that aspect. Completely agree with that. And the I want to talk about the rape scene too, or the attempted rape scene. So there's this weird thing that's going on with Ken, and I'm getting the sense that he is someone who has been suffering from probably some sort of abuse himself. So he's like this baseball star and all at the school. But we see a scene of him, he's always like, kind of like muttering, Tadaima, Okairi. These are phrases you say when you come home, right? Yeah. Tadaima is what the person says when they come into the house, and then Okairi is what everyone else says when they come home. Um, and then like right at the start, he goes up to one of the girls. I can't remember which one it is. Um,
I have it here. Hold on, hold on,
okay, thank you.
hold on. It's Michiko, I believe. Well, Michiko
Michiko.
is the one that he assaults.
Okay, so Michiko's okay. That's Michiko. Okay, so he comes up to Michiko early on in the movie, and he dumps something. He puts something down her shirt, and we don't know what it is. But then she's like screaming, and she's on the floor, and she's like thrashing. We don't know what's going on. And at first, like I thought he had like tickled her or something, and she was laughing. I was very kind of confused at first. But then we see her in the nurse's office, and we find out that it's like acid he poured down her, and he's like burned her back basically. And so it was this whole thing. And then we get the scene when he is trying to talk to her, and they're alone in the classroom, and he's trying to ask her out, and she's just kind of like ignoring him, and then it escalates until he just basically starts trying to assault her. And
Mm.
this the music that's playing is just it's freaking haunting that when that whole sequence is going on. And then the entire time, he keeps repeating Tadaima Okaidi, Tadaima Okaidi, and it's just and it made me think that maybe he's being like sexually assaulted by someone in his home, or maybe he's seen like his father sexually assaulting someone else in his home, and or
Mm.
something to because it's a very that is not he's suffering from some kind of trauma there, obviously.
But before we get more into that, we're going to take a quick ad break.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
And we're back. All right, now Sam, you said you had some thoughts you wanted to share about that whole sequence as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Before I talk about the assault sequence itself, though, I think it's worth noting that the scene with the acid attack is, I think, another of the flashbacks. It's not happening in the same time period and I think that's quite clear because we can't see on Michiko's back during the scenes after the assault where the back of her shirt is ripped. We can't really see the scarring, so it's obviously been a little while since that moment. But the way again that Somai plays it within the narrative is jarring, not just because of how it happens, but because it occurs, I think, as a story in the middle of the scene where the baseball kids are hanging out together and just chatting. And it's, yeah, as I say, it's a really jarring piece of structure. So, but to talk about the assault scene itself, it's interesting. It's one of the most effective scenes in the film, and it's as effective a horror scene as I've seen in a long time, actually, because it starts out with him just asking her out and like literally backing her into a corner as she backs away from him. And if we hadn't seen that acid attack sequence earlier in the film, we'd wonder why she's backing away, because in that moment, he's just asking her out if you're observing it, without that context. There's nothing particularly scary about it other than he's fairly intense. But what it becomes is him sort of following her through the school, her shutting herself into a classroom, back against the door, and he's just kicking the door. And I think what's really haunting about it and really disturbing about it for me is the nonchalance with which he's doing it. Just this repeated rhythm of the kicking of the door, not hard, but repeatedly, and watching it give in a couple of places as he just continues and continues. It reminds me a little bit of the ringing phone at the beginning of Once Upon a Time in America, this insistent noise that gets into your skull and becomes, it's not disturbing in Once Upon a Time in America, but disruptive, you know? It's really effective use of sound to disturb as well as the situation.
Yeah, the you're right, the calmness that which he's going through it, and then there's this moment when he's tearing her shirt off, and my reading of that is that he sees the scar that he caused before, and it almost, and then he starts punishing himself over it. So it was this it's this very it was this very interesting whole sequence there.
The problem with the sequence for me, as effective as it is, and I wonder if you agree with this, it feels out of step with not the film as it has been to that point, but the film as it will continue. Because in that moment, I think any group that was aware of it, and they all are, would ostracize Ken for the rest of the evening. And the fact that there's this moment when sort of just after it, hold on, I'm looking for my notes again. There's a moment when Mikami has clearly found them. Michiko's wearing a suit jacket at this point to cover herself up, and just looking very shell-shocked. But Mikami says to Ken that she's forgiven him, you know, in that moment, and it's clearly not true. But the fact that Ken is then a part of all the rest of the evening, that he's dancing with the others, that he's essentially just reabsorbed into the group within minutes, it just doesn't work for me. It's jarring, and it means I'm a little disconnected. As much as I like the individual scenes in the rest of the movie, it all feels a little disconnected from this incredibly jarring moment, you know?
No, I completely agree with that, and I think you are absolutely on the money. And I've seen other people also complain about that aspect of it too, and I think those complaints are very valid. And so I'm of two minds of this. On the one mind, I am 100% with you. It feels too extreme and too jarring, and for them just to so quickly after just forgive it and then have it never be mentioned again. I'm totally with, and but on the other hand, I'm wondering if Somai was trying to communicate a message there about the way that sexual assault is typically handled in Japan, even now to this day, in a lot of instances too. But even true, more true back in the 1980s. And I think that this idea of sexual assault is very minimized, and it's something that is, there's this onus of the woman. It's just like, oh, well, just, you're okay, it's all over with, and he's sorry, so why don't we just move on with it. And I've seen that happen in, not firsthand, but I know people who've been in those situations where something happened at a workplace event, like a drinking party or something like that, and a woman goes and complains to her bosses about it, and the bosses are like, well, you were both drinking, you were alone together, you were going over to his place. Are you sure this was really, as bad as you're making it out to be? And I have seen that firsthand, those arguments being used. So that is something that definitely happens. And I wonder if by trying to make the assault so drawn out and so obviously monstrous, and then go to so quickly forgiving it, if maybe that he was trying to shock people into realizing that this is not okay, is the only thing I could really think of. Now, I will grant you, it is still very ham-handed. It still doesn't quite fit with the logic of the movie, but that's the only way I can think of to explain his thinking. Do I think he should have done it a different way? Yeah, absolutely. I think I've got a lot of problems with that whole sequence. And I think it does go on too
It's
long.
interesting. I don't have a problem with that sequence. That sequence is incredibly effective. I think it gets across its point perfectly. It's terrifying, and the point that you're making about the way that it could be seen as talking about sexual assault and the way that it's brushed under the rug, not just in Japanese society, let's be absolutely clear about this.
Absolutely true. Yes.
Is a valid one. I would be interested to know if Samai has talked about what he was going for with that. I should probably listen to the commentary on the disc by Tom Mez and see what he says about it in that respect. So it's like, it's not that I think the scene is bad. The scene is one of the best scenes in the film in terms of like pure effectiveness. It's just kind of what it does to the context of the rest of it. This moment when they're all dancing outside and singing together and stripping off their clothes and things. And I struggle with the idea that hours after that assault, Michiko is doing that with Ken in the same space. I don't even struggle with the idea that the rest of the kids might be doing it, but Michiko is in that moment. I think if you had put her outside that scene, you know, maybe even just left her on the stage as they were, I think I would understand that a little bit more. It's that sequence and the fact that everyone is involved in it except Rie, who we'll talk about in a minute. I imagine it, you know, it's that makes it a bit jarring, I think, beyond the fact that it's deliberately jarring, you know.
Yeah. What I meant by saying I mean, I think you are right. You're 100% right. It is very effective. I think the thing that I fall with it is I hate scenes like that, and it is too effective for me.
Oh, sure.
Is
I
where I
mean,
fall on that aspect of it.
you know, don't get me wrong, it's very difficult to watch. And but that is why it's such a well-crafted scene, you know, or the
Absolutely, yes.
demonstration of how well-crafted the scene it is.
Yeah. And I think and I do still fall down on, I think that's what he was trying to say. Because also, too, if I'm not mistaken, when the kids are all sleeping there before the end with Mikami, aren't Ken and Michiko kind of like cuddling together in that scene too?
Uh I'm not sure if that's Ken and Michiko. And I yeah, I can't remember what the collection of couples is in that moment. So yeah, you might want to cut that.
But I think
can't
no,
remember.
it's a good, because I can't remember. I could have sworn it was, though, which also, which it does both go to your point of I don't understand why she'd be doing this, but it also fits in with the culture of normalizing sexual assault that exists in Japan, and especially existed in the 1980s. So that's where I land on it. Is I totally get those objections to it, those complaints about how it feels so jarring from what happens in the rest of the movie. But I do keep landing on, I kind of think that's what he was going for. I think he wanted it to be jarring and for people to be like, wait a second, what the hell? And
Sure.
I mean, I think there should have been maybe a better way of trying to express that in some way. I'm not sure how he could have. Maybe if we saw Michiko being a little bit uncomfortable around him, or even if she wouldn't actually directly say anything, but just some indication that this thing actually happened and it is still sitting with her.
I mean, to be clear, I think we absolutely get that in Yuka Onishi's performance. Like, I think she's fantastic in this, and I think she also won some awards for her performance in this film. And I think it's probably the best performance in the film. And she's just terrific throughout, dealing with that whole relationship. And there is always that sort of discomfort that I feel in the way that she regards Ken right throughout the film. In fact, I want to go back now that I've figured out that the chronology of it, and see if I can see it in the opening sequence as well, because obviously the other boys turn up at that sequence, I believe. So I want to see how early I can spot that discomfort in her performance, because until the acid attack occurs, you're not really thinking about it. So, you know, it's worth looking at again at that, I think.
And if I'm not mistaken, I'm just double checking, but okay, no, this wasn't her first. Well, this is her first movie, but she was on a TV show before this. So yeah, even more impressive and how great she is in this movie is the fact that this was a very early role for her. And she was also she was known mostly as an idol singer, I think, before this, actually.
Right. She hasn't done. She worked. It seems, I'm just looking at this. She worked semi-regularly up to about 2012, and then did a little thing in 2015, and she's literally just come back, done her first role since then in an episode of a TV series called Aibu Tokyo Detective Duo. So, like, she's still around, but probably not working as much as you'd like, given how good she is in this. But
no, definitely not.
Nice.
Yeah, she's. But yeah, I don't think I've seen her in any of this other. I'm looking through her filmography. I don't think I've seen her in any of this other stuff. So
the only thing that rings a bell, and I haven't seen it, is Godzilla Final Wars. But there we go. We should talk a little bit about Rie, because obviously Yuki Kudo is the other sort of big name that has gone on a lot from this movie. And she's kind of separate from a lot of what we've been talking about. You know, she's not trapped in the school during the typhoon with the other kids. She's run away from home. There's a very weird moment that seems to sort of prefigure that it happens just before she runs away from home, where she wakes up in the morning and I think is like late for school, and there's nobody at home. And then the next time we see her, she's lying in bed again, and she's got a cross drawn on her face, a Christian cross, or, you know, that sort of iconography. I don't know whether it means anything in that respect, drawn on her face with lipstick. And it's really funny to me, because the iconic image of Yuki Kudo is from Mystery Train, Jim Jarmusch's film. And the image that you always see of her in that movie, and the first image that people will have of her, I'm sure, is the image of her and her boyfriend sitting at the end of the bed in the hotel, with both of them with lipstick smeared all over their faces. And I just think it's funny that two of the kind of iconic moments of her involve that. But she has this relationship with her boyfriend Mikami where she's always kind of playful. There's a nice moment early in the film where he's just trying to sort of concentrate on his homework, and she's like lying on the desk opposite him and just making noises and trying to distract him and saying, shall we go somewhere and things like that. She's a very dynamic, playful character, I find. And it feels like she's not getting enough of that back from Mikami, and maybe that's why she decides to go to the city for the night, and it happens to be on the night of this storm.
Yeah, she's got a very, and I think that goes back to what she was saying with that university student that she ends up going over to his place is, she talks about how Mikami's going to be going to high school next year in Tokyo. So I get the sense that he's, he's a little bit older than her too, like maybe a year or two ahead of her.
But they're in the same class.
Oh, they are in the same class. Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe it's just that he got accepted. So high school in I think it's actually similar to how they do it in the UK, but high school in Japan it's not like high school in America, for example, where it's public high school for the most part. It's part of the mandatory education. Compulsory education in Japan is only up until the end of junior high school. After that, now something like over 90% of students do go on to high school, but high school, and they do have public high schools, but it is kind of more of like almost like a college prep type thing as opposed to like its own thing as it is in America.
High school starts at 16 in Japan, is that?
Yes. Yeah. It's 3 years. Right. Junior high school is 3 years starting from 7th grade. And then high school is 3 years starting from 10th grade.
I believe now that school is compulsory to 18 in the UK. It used to be 16, but I think it's now 18. But don't quote me on that, because that, if it is true, happened well after I left school. So, I'm not 100%, but I think that's true.
Okay. But yeah, so that is the situation there. So when people go to high school, it's not uncommon for them to, try to get accepted into like a good high school, sometimes in another part of the country. So in this case, right, Mikami's obviously a studious kid, so he's probably gotten accepted to some good high school in Tokyo. Whereas Rie is probably not that studious, I'm guessing, from like the kind of like freewheeling approach she has and how she's always kind of goofing off when he's trying to do his homework. So maybe if she's going to high school at all, it's probably going to be at the local public high school as opposed to the going to Tokyo. So that's probably what that situation is. And then I think that this whole idea of growing up, right? This kind of like, and this is where we get again into that whole idea of it being an anti-coming of age film, and this thought she has of, he's going off to this high school in Tokyo, and before I know it, I'm gonna be an old country woman, basically, is kind of like this thing she's worried about.
I think there's an interesting thing when she's at the college boy's apartment, and he tries to get her back there or he does get her back there on the premise that it's been raining a lot, and so she needs somewhere dry to go, and the first thing literally that he says to her when they get in the door is that she should take her dress off. Happily, he does allow her to get changed in the bathroom, but there is sort of an undercurrent of threat to it, and this is just around the same time that we see the sexual assault scene in the school. So we've got that in our heads as well. But one of the things that I think is interesting in that sequence is we haven't seen much evidence of it, but she talks in that scene about being sick of being locked up, and like maybe referring to strict parents. But what we see really is absent parents. We don't see her parents at all. Actually, we don't see many parents, if any, during the film. But we get one at least extended sequence in her apartment where she's the only person there, and I feel like though that this moment where she talks about being sick of being locked up actually empowers her to leave that guy's apartment. Um, and one thing that I did notice, she's like literally walking into the storm, and you could see it as sort of metaphorically stepping into adulthood in a certain way, even though she's clearly like a little lost child as well. And one thing that a detail that I thought was really interesting is these red shoes that she's wearing, and I could almost take that as a sort of nod to Dorothy, you know.
Yeah, I noticed the red shoes too, and I also picked up on that line that when she says, I'm tired of being locked up. And you're right, because she wakes up in the morning and, she's all upset that her mom hasn't woken her up. And then and we go into that. And again, I'm not sure if it's a flashback or what, but we see her, the scene of her masturbating in, I think it's her mom's bed,
Yes.
if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and that's the moment that she's got the lipstick cross.
With the lipstick cross, yeah. And so you're also asking about the cross too, and it so I mean, Christianity is known here. It does exist. Something like 20% of the population is Christian. So, and although funnily enough, you do find a lot of people who will just wear like a Christian cross just because, like a necklace or something, just because they think it looks nice. Like I remember working with a Japanese teacher when I was teaching in junior high school, and she had a cross on, and I had asked her, I'm like, "Oh, are you Christian?" And she's like, "Oh, no, I just like the cross. I just like the necklace." So there is a lot of that stuff too.
I think that's interesting, but I mean, like I was saying about the use of the cross in that sequence, I don't know if it has any sort of religious significance either to her or to the film. It may just be that that's how you would draw a cross like that, and that's how it sort of fits the face in that moment. You know what I mean?
I mean, the only thing I could think of is because there are, Jehovah's Witness is a pretty big sect of Christianity here, and the only thing I could think of is maybe maybe she was raised in some kind of like stricter religious upbringing, and then because she's masturbating, she draws the cross on her face. Like that's the only thing I can think of. But even that, I'm not. I find myself second guessing that as it's coming out of my mouth. So I'm really kind of lost on the cross. But that kind of thing might also explain why she talks about being afraid of why she's sick of being locked up. Maybe it's not so much being physically locked up, but it might be, some sort of strict upbringing. But maybe it's a case where, because there's no mention of her father. It's only her mother is mentioned as far as I can recall. So I don't know. I'm really kind of at a loss about that line.
Yeah. But I do like the sequences in I believe it's hang on, I had it here in Kamakura. Yeah, I do like the sequences in Kamakura when Rie is on her own and trying to battle her way through this storm and get back home. She finds that she's stuck because the trains aren't running. And we don't see a lot of her storyline. It's a bit of a shame that we sort of lose her during the third act of the film quite a lot and spend all of our time at the school, because I feel like she is a really key part of the film in the first two acts, and I think it's a little bit of a shame that we lose track of her, particularly, as I said, given how charismatic Yuki Kudo is in the part. And I've been pursuing some of her other films, so I'll talk about that in a bit. But yeah, I sort of like that sequence. I think a lot of us, have had nights like that. I remember one. It wasn't quite this epic, but I remember when I was staying at my friend's house once, we were doing Macbeth, and it was our dress rehearsal. So we had gone out of the house. I was staying at his place, and we'd gone out of the house in our costumes, which were these knitted string chainmail suits that we were wearing. As we were coming home, it was throwing it down with rain, and this armor was just sucking up the rain. And we realized that we were locked out and that his parents were in France until like, probably they were going to be home at 1 a.m. So there's this abiding memory of me and my friend sheltering in his porch, wearing this knitted string chainmail, soaking wet for several hours. And yeah, it's not as epic as Rie's, but it's a funny little story.
Yeah, I saw people wondering about the significance of the ocarina players, and I'm not quite sure. I mean, part of me just thinks that's Japan at late at night. It's just the way it is. Because I have been out in the streets and in Tokyo too, and out there like past midnight, and there's some you get some interesting characters out on the streets at that time of night. So that's I wonder if maybe that's what he was trying to convey in that, but otherwise I'm not really sure.
But by the way, you can cut that story if it's just a bunch of irrelevant bullshit and not.
No, it's fine. It's fine. It's okay. But well, let's talk about there are two other things I really wanted to kind of talk about here. First is this kind of like lesbian relationship between Yasuko and Midori and this third girl whose name I can't recall.
Yes, I think I misnamed her earlier, and I'm just looking for it. I had it here. Yumi.
Okay.
It's
so
Yasuko and Yumi who are the couple, and Midori.
Yeah,
who's,
and Midori seems like
friend.
kind of like tangentially involved at certain points there. So
yeah,
but yeah, you're right. It's mostly it's
Yumi
Yasuko
is
and
the
Yumi.
girl with the short hair.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Thank you. So what was your take on that whole sequence being in the scene in the movie?
I mean, I feel like it's sort of uncommonly honest for a teen movie of the 80s in a lot of ways. Like, when you're a teenager, sometimes you need to figure that shit out. And I think there's a playfulness to it, but it's also clear that they are together, I think. And I think, it makes me think of just two girls who are sort of figuring their sexuality out in the moment and keeping that just among their very tight friend group, because I don't know how Japan's attitude to LGBTQ people is now or was in the 80s, but certainly it's not something you saw a lot in John Hughes movies, and that really reflects the attitude that America had to LGBT relationships in that era. Was not particularly accepting. And so, as I say, I think it's refreshingly matter of fact. And as we were saying earlier, because of the way that Somai shoots it, it never comes across as prurient. It never comes across as being something that's tilted toward the male audience. It's just a moment between these girls, and I think that's great.
Yeah, I was wondering because the attitude in Japan towards homosexuality, I wouldn't say it's hostile, but it's also not really welcoming. It's kind of like, hey, just keep it quiet is kind of like the prevailing attitude a lot of people seem to have towards it, especially back in the 80s. So I did think it was interesting that they had it in there. And then finally we get the Mikami's suicide scene, which there's a lot of things that make sense of it in the context of the movie, especially after that conversation he has with Umemiya and the fact that he is on this path to becoming an adult. He's been so studious and all that. So all of that made sense to me. But the thing that really surprised me is how after that, we get Rie coming back and she runs into Akira, who was not part of the group that was locked up in there. and they're just kind of like having this random conversation, and we never see her reaction to Mikami's death, which I thought was an interesting choice.
Okay, maybe this is a wrong take or a controversial take. Mikami's not dead. There's that shot of his feet sticking out of the muddy ground, and his feet wiggle and move. I'm like, all right, it's a joke. It's not a very good joke. It's a joke that really undermines the movie in a lot of ways for me. But he's alive. He jumped out of a fairly low window and fell into a very muddy puddle because of the typhoon. It's a gag. And that goes so against the doomy feel of the whole build up to that moment, where he's making these tens upon tens, I'm not sure if we get to hundreds, but many paper cranes and hanging them all over the room and building a sort of scaffold so that he can get to the out of chairs, so that he can actually get to the window, which is a bit higher up. And then to sort of undercut all that with what seems like a gag to me, I don't know that I get either side of it, you know. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe, you know, it's just a mistake that his feet move or something, but that's the way that I sort of took it. And yeah, I don't get it in a certain way.
I don't know, like, because I have seen some other reviews saying that they also thought he died, but that I was also taken aback by that shot of his legs there too, and how they're kind of moving. But at the same time, the kids, when they go out there to see him, they still look terrified by it. So that's why so my first thought when I saw his legs, I'm like, oh, he's alive. Maybe it's like a pool or something he fell into. But then you
Yeah.
see the kids come out too, and they still seem horrified. So I'm just like, so I'm not sure. I feel like it's, yeah, I don't really like it. I don't really like it. If I don't like the way it was done, and if it was just supposed to be a gag, I don't like it as a gag. Now, the other thing I'm wondering is, because I can't recall before the end of the movie, when was the last time we saw Akira in the film? Do you remember when?
Uh well, so I think it's like the end of the last day of school before the typhoon, I think. I'm not 100% on what scene or anything, but yeah,
Okay.
I mean, I think he's at school that day.
Okay, because one of the things I was wondering about too, and I was just thinking about as we've been having this discussion, is because after Rie goes out into the storm, she leaves the university guy's place, she goes out into the storm, and then the next time we see her is in when she is kind of going through this like surreal trek through Tokyo when she sees the ocarina players, and then we see her the next day, you know, walking up to Akira and talking about how, he seems like he's grown up, and that that there's no school today and all that. And it made me wonder, is there a possibility that maybe, I think that one of the problems here is because it is Akira we see and not Mikami, but wonder if maybe is Rie dead at the end of the movie? Like, has she died out in the typhoon or something? And is that why we see her in that like weird kind of
I,
almost surreal exchange?
I certainly didn't take it that way. If Mikami is dead, I think it's clear that she doesn't know at that point.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so and as I say, I don't think he is. Um, and the reason that she wouldn't encounter him on the way to school, whether he's alive or dead, is that school's closed that day,
Mm-hmm.
because of the typhoon, because of the damage. Um, but kind of the way I took it was it's a moment where the film is closing the circle, because it opens with the kids breaking into the rooftop pool of the school and messing around at night. And it closes with two of them breaking into the rooftop pool after, the typhoon, and having, essentially going on to that same moment again, and it's like this huge event has happened. All of these relationships have been thrown up in the air in the chaos of the typhoon, but everything's the same. They're just going to break into the rooftop pool and mess around because they're kids. That's kind of the way I took it. It reminds me a little bit of the final scene of a great coming of age movie called Fucking Amal by Lucas Moodysson, which is about two Swedish schoolgirls who have a relationship across the film. And it's sort of the build up is to this scene where they're locked in the toilets together in the school, and eventually they just come out and go, and the slightly older one says, get out of the way, this is my girlfriend, we're going home to have sex. And then you cut to a scene where they're back at the house and they're just having chocolate milk together, and it's this really fun improvised ending. And it's just sort of hammering home that even though they are probably together in that moment and in a relationship for the moment, they're still just kids and like figuring shit out, and they just want to drink chocolate milk even though they've said to their friends that they're going off to have sex. And it kind of feels like that moment in this movie to me. Like, everything's changed and nothing has.
Okay, that's an interesting take on it. I'm still not sure where I fall on it, because there's the ending is just, I mean, like I said, the whole thing about her maybe being dead is just something I kind of, it was something that just entered my mind as we were talking. I just thought it was worth maybe mentioning here.
I think if she hadn't left the apartment, I would agree with you.
Okay. Well, also the apartment scene too. And I forgot to mention this before, but the music that's playing as, he comes and he sits behind her and he's like stroking her hair. It's the same music that was playing when Ken was going to assault Michiko. So there's that.
Oh, I didn't catch that. Maybe she doesn't leave the apartment.
Maybe not. Yeah, that's another thing too.
There's something to look at next time.
Well, or maybe she does leave the apartment, but she has nowhere to go because she goes out into the rain. She doesn't have an umbrella or anything. And then we see her, she goes under the awning of that tailor shop. And then the next time we see her, she's at the train station. So did she just stand there the whole time waiting until the rain let up? I mean, there is that whole undercurrent of dread happening throughout that entire sequence. So I'm not sure. I'm not really sure what
the third act.
The entire third act, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, with the exception of that moment when they're on the stage and then dancing outside, the whole third act has this weightiness and dread. And again, these are things that, as I say, I've only seen this twice. I'm trying to give like educated, informed takes on some of this, but your impressions of a film and your interpretations of a film, particularly a film that is occasionally elliptical like this one is, and from a different culture that you're not experienced with, and clearly layered again like this one is, that your impressions and your takes may change as you watch it more and more times, and you're raising things I'm really interested to sort of look into next time I see it. So I mean, I would hold to the stuff that I've been talking about here, but there are other interpretations that I'm going to be looking into when I rewatch this movie, which I will be doing.
Yeah, I think the only interpretation I'm solidly convinced of right now is just the message that, like you said, this is an anti-coming of age film. That's the only thing I am completely certain about. And also the whole reason behind the lack of reactions to the sexual assault at the school. That those are the ones that I'm pretty solid on. The rest of it, I'm very kind of like floating around from theory to theory, and I'm not really sure where to land. And also too, something else about I'm looking at the scene of Mikami's legs in the puddle, and I'm looking at the kids standing around him. And I'm not sure if it's just this scene, that this particular still I'm looking at online, but it doesn't even look like it's physically possible for him to be that far down in it.
Which is kind of why I think it's a gag. It reads cartoony. It reads
so
Tunes.
cartoony. It does, yes. It's a very bizarre framing, and I'm not sure, especially because, again, if they were all laughing about it or something, then I think I would completely agree with you. It's just a gag. But the fact that they all look horrified while he's in this very cartoonish pose with his legs wiggling completely throws me off, and I have no idea what to think about it. Again,
it's another thing that I would love to see if Somai made any comment about, or as I said, I didn't get around to the Tom Mes commentary, so I'd be interested to, see what he has to say on it as well. But yeah, it's another slightly jarring thing in the film that is often deliberately jarring. And, I think that speaks to its successes as much as anything.
I think he actually listens to this show. So Tom, if you are listening, I would love to hear some of your thoughts about this. But
if you are listening and I'm, completely pulling stuff out of thin air, I apologize.
Okay, but I think that's a pretty good note to end on, unless there are any final things you wanted to mention about Typhoon Club.
I would just say, sort of in general, I would recommend it. I think it's a really interesting piece of coming of age cinema. We don't actually see much coming of age cinema that is, as we've been saying, like anti coming of age. Like, most of it is about the idea of moving on and becoming an adult, and that being a freeing thing and a good thing. I think this is kind of the reverse, and that's fascinating to me. It is weird, it is jarring, it is culturally specific in ways that I think will take some adjusting for some Western audiences, more the less Japanese film that you've seen. But it's really worthwhile. And the other thing I just wanted to say is, because I watched a bunch of her stuff, go and watch some more of Yuki Kudo's films. Everything I've seen so far is really terrific. She's just an absolutely magnetic screen presence. I don't like Jim Jarmusch's films at all, but her segment of Mystery Train, which happily is the first sequence, almost unlocked him for me. Like, the rest of that film didn't really work for me, but that 40 minutes is incredible. I also watched Heaven's Burning with Russell Crowe this week, which is really an interesting post-Tarantino couple on the run movie from Australia, which he went back to make straight after LA Confidential. So it catches him in a great moment, and she plays a Japanese woman who runs away from her husband on their honeymoon and is then kidnapped during a bank robbery and ends up pulling other bank jobs with Russell Crowe, pursued by her vengeful husband. It's really good fun. And she's also in a great film with Ethan Hawke called Snow Falling on Cedars. So yeah, I mean, anything that you can see with Yuki Kudo. And I'm going to be looking into the rest of this cast as well and seeing what I can dig up.
Yeah, most of them, it looks like they got some stuff else, but it seems like some of them, like whoever played Ken, doesn't seem like he's really done anything else.
Wow.
And the guy who played Mikami, he's done like I think like two other movies, and that was about it.
That
Um,
happens a fair amount with
it does, yeah.
teen movies as well, in particular, because you get people who are just sort of doing this when they're kids, or audition for one movie, get it, and maybe it's just not what they want to do as adults and things like that. So you get quite a lot of people who are quite good in like one or two teen movies and then never do anything again.
Yeah, I just recently did a rewatch of the TV show Veronica Mars, and one of the actors on there, Teddy Dunn. Apparently after he did that, he apparently after he finished that show, he just kind of like went on to like law school and became like a lawyer, and that was it. So yeah,
Hmm.
you get a lot of
The,
people like that too. They just figure
the
like
the
it's not for me.
the person I always talk about is Rainbow Harvest, who is a really interesting actress who did like 11 things ever, including like TV episodes and a few really interesting teen movies, Old Enough, Mirror Mirror, stuff like that. And then just disappeared. Nobody knows where she is or what she's doing. And like it just vanished from the industry. It was super interesting presence. It
One final
happens.
thing, did you the version that you saw, did you see there's a 4K restoration I see. Which version of
Yeah.
this movie did you see?
I watched the Third Window Blu-ray, which is from the 4K restoration. My friend has the 4K disc, so which is only available in the US. So I'm sure I'm going to be rewatching it from that at some point. But yeah, the Blu-ray from Third Window is excellent. I highly recommend it.
Okay, because one of the problems I had, I just saw a regular standard DVD version that I found here, and it was very difficult to see a lot of stuff. Like there's some scenes that are just like extremely dark on the version I saw, and
Right.
it was very difficult to even kind of make sense of what was happening. So I'm hoping it's better it's a little bit more clearer in the 4K version. So definitely try to get the 4K version if you're going to seek this movie out.
I mean, no, the Blu-ray is I mean, it's spectacular. It's a really good Blu-ray from a 4K restoration. You couldn't ask for much more, particularly given that, yeah, I was going to say, as I understand, this film has been really, really difficult to see, particularly in
Yes.
anything approaching good quality up until this. And Third Window are releasing an entire line of Directors Company films. Door and Door 2 are out at the moment. As I said, I've got Luminous Woman coming. There's a bunch of others available. So if you just look for Third Window's Directors Company releases, they're not cheap, but they're definitely worthwhile.
I'm also interested in checking out Love Hotel, which is another
Hmm.
movie that he did the same year. Apparently, I've seen some people say that like this kind of like trilogy of films, he did like Typhoon Club, Sailor Suit and Machine Gun, and then Love Hotel, are kind of like this like trinity of his work basically. So I'm curious. I'm curious now to see Love Hotel especially. But Sam, thanks so much for coming on again. And where anything you'd like to tell people where they can find you? Anything you'd like to promote before we
Um,
close up?
yeah. My other podcast, my main podcast is not about Japanese film at all. It's about the great character actress Jennifer Jason Leigh. If you're interested in her, or if you're just interested in two people and their guests talking about a great actor, then search for Fearless Pretender on Apple Podcasts. You can follow me at Blue Sky or Twitter. I'm not calling it X, as 24 FPS UK, where I, shoot the breeze about movies and actually talk a fair amount about Japanese rock music, which has been a discovery. So, come and check me out on there. But yeah, thanks very much for having me again. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Same on my end too. Definitely have to have you come back again. As for us, japanonfilm.com is the website. We are Japan on Film on Instagram, Blue Sky, and Threads. And we are a member of the Film Stories podcast network. So please be sure to follow them and listen up after the credits to hear what is coming up next. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.
The Japan on Film podcast is produced by me, Perry Constantine, in conjunction with the Film Stories Podcast Network. Visit japanonfilm.com for show notes, episodes, and information about being a guest yourself. You can also reach out to me on the website's contact form if you have questions or comments about Japanese movies or the show itself. The show is at Japan on Film on Threads, Blue Sky, and Instagram, so please be sure to follow us. If you'd like to support the show, you can donate on japanonfilm.com, purchase from our advertisers, or leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Join the Film Stories Podcast Network Discord from the link in the show notes to connect with me and many other cinema fans and podcasters.